Hey guys, in this video we are going to talk about React State, which is a special object that we use for managing data in React applications. You are going to learn what state is, how to use it, and also the main differences of state usage between class and functional components. We're gonna cover all of them in this video. But before we begin, if you are interested in learning more about web development, please subscribe to my channel and turn on your bell notifications so when I upload a new video, you will get notified. In my previous video, we have started to build a simple React application from scratch, and if you are a beginner, I recommend you to watch it first. And in that video, we have used props for passing data from one component to another. But the thing is that props is immutable, which means that data coming from another component with props cannot be changed, cannot be manipulated in this component. But there is another special object that React provides, which is state, and by using it, we can manage data inside our components. For example, if we want to make a change here in the username or tweet properties, then to do that, we are going to use state. Now, the important thing is that in the older versions of React, we were allowed to use state inside class components only. It was not possible using state with functional components like this one, but later React has brought a new feature called hooks, and by using React hooks, now we are also able to use state in our functional components. It's important for you guys to learn both of the ways because you will probably see both of the usages in your projects. So if you are learning state for the first time, it will be good for you to stick with me till the end of this video. Understanding state takes some time and it has some different usages between the class and functional components. It's more complex thing in React, so that's why I would like to make things as much as simple as I can. So let's leave this example for now and start with a much simpler component. I'm going to create a class component now. So let's get to work, and I'm creating here our first class component, and let's give it a name of counter. Okay. So let's define our class here, counter, and this is going to be a React component, so it extends the component keyword. We should also import the component keyword from React. Okay, and let's also export our component. All right, so we have created our first class component. Now let's return our first JSX. Okay, now what you see here is an error because unlike functional components, we cannot directly return JSX. It should always have a render function. And inside this render function, we are allowed to return JSX. This is how it works with class components. And now let's call our component here in the app.js. Counter, and let's render it. As we can see, now it appeared here. For now, I'm going to delete this part so you will not get confused. Okay, now let's create our first variable, count, and the initial value will be 0. Now what I'm going to do is that I will show the result of our count value. Okay, now we received an error because we need to access the variable with the this keyword. So the error is gone. Next, I'm going to add here a button, which we are going to use to increment our count variable. So let's put a plus sign here. And we also need to put them inside a wrapper, otherwise we are going to receive an error. Okay, now what I would like to do is that when I click on this button, this value here should get incremented. So let's create here an increment function. And each time when we call this function, it's going to increment our count variable. And finally, let's also log the count variable to the console. Now I can bind the increment function to our button with the onClick event. Like this. Okay, now let's click on this button and see what happens. Now, as you can see, each time I click on the button, we see on the console that it's working, but however, it's not working on the actual web page. So why is that? This is happening because React does not work this way. So the first time our counter class has been rendered to the web page, it had the 0 value. Now the thing is that here it hasn't worked because React rendered the value once, but for changing it, it is going to need the help of state, because React components re-render the UI based on the state. So when the state of a component changes, then React will be able to update the user interface as well. And without using the state, it's not going to work. So that's why I would like to show it. Now let's make this in the right way, and let's define our first state object. And inside this state object, we can define our count value. And also we should add now this.state.count, and also let's update all of them. Okay, save it. Now here we see a warning, because with class components we can't update state directly. We should use a helper function called setState, and with the help of setState, then we are allowed and we can update the actual state. Even if I try to increment it, it's still not working because we have not used setState. So what is setState? If you are working with class components, then setState is going to be the only way to update your initial state. So let's do this in the right way. We are going to use the setState method inside here. So this.setstate, and inside we are going to define our count object, our count variable. And every time we use this method, instead of this line, now we are going to use the setState to increment our count variable. Now let's try again. When I click on the increment button, as we can see, now this time it's working without any problems. So while working with class components, the right way to work with state is that using the state object and defining the initial values inside of the state object. And if you need to change to update the state, then you are going to need the help of the setState method. Otherwise, you won't be able to update your state. And before the introduction of React hooks, it was not possible to use state inside functional components. But after the introduction of React hooks, now we can also use and work with state inside functional components. And now let's see how to do it. Okay, now let's convert this into a functional component. But before we move on, you need to remember that we cannot use the state and setState inside functional components. As the first step, I'm going to convert this class component into a functional component. So let's do it. Now there is a hook called useState, and we need to import it first. Now inside our functional component, we can call our useState hook like this. So let's save it. And we are receiving an error because we don't use the render function with functional components, so we can just remove it. Okay, and also we cannot use the state object and the setState inside functional components, so they're also giving an error, but I'm going to clear them later. Now inside the useState method, we can define our initial state, which is 0, and now let's log this to the console as always and see what it returns. Let's ignore the errors for now, and what we see is that the useState method returns an array with two values. The first one is the initial state, and the second one is the function which we are going to replace with the setState method. It's basically the setState method. So let's clear this. And here I can define our array, and I need to destructure so we can access these two values. The first one is the initial state itself, so I can write here just count. And the second one is going to be our setState method, but we cannot use the exact name because this is for class components. So I'm going to write here set count. Okay, now our initial state is 0, and we are going to use the setCount method for updating this. So let's do that. Now I don't need the state object anymore, so I clear this. And here, instead of using this.setstate, I'm going to use set count. I can just copy this here. When we call this function, when we call the increment function, now instead of this setState, our setCount method is going to update our value. So let's try it. Also now I can clear this keyword because we are not in class component anymore. So as we can see, our component is now much simpler and easier to read. Now let's refresh it. We also don't need the state keyword anymore. Okay, now our component looks much cleaner, and when I run this, we receive an error. Now what we are doing here is that we are trying to update the count value of the state directly. Now the right way to doing this is that we should pass here a callback function. Instead of using count itself, we need to update the previous state by using a callback function. Now let's try again. And as we can see, it's working without any problems. So the useState method is just one type of React hooks. This is just an introduction to useState. There are still much more things to learn about useState and React hooks, which I'm going to cover in my following videos. So if you guys find this video helpful, please hit the like button, and thank you guys for watching.